And when you allow them to be the energetic person that they're meant to be, so much peace and so much beauty can happen, right?
Welcome to the Food Matters Podcast, your home for health and wellness. My name is James Colquhoun, filmmaker and founder of foodmatters.com, and I am your host on this journey to inner and outer transformation. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a short moment to talk to you about the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program, because studying nutrition completely changed my life. It helped me to heal my father, get him off 6 different medications, lose 50 pounds, and completely regain and transform his life and health. But the problem is that we're not really taught about nutrition in our schooling system. The medical profession is rarely pronouncing the facts of using nutrition as medicine. And we have a fast food industry that thrives off misleading consumers. So if you're looking to learn about how to use nutrition as medicine to either heal yourself or a loved one or help prevent chronic disease, or you want to take that next step on your study and nutrition journey and become a certified nutrition coach, then the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program is for you. This is a 10-week or self-paced, internationally accredited certification program designed to take you through some of the most important topics on the latest research when it comes to nutrition and natural healing, including gut healing, autoimmune conditions, balancing hormones naturally, detoxification, biochemical individual approaches to nutrition. Plus, it brings together the best that we know about nutrition science and anthropological research, and bringing these two approaches together to help you cut through the confusion about what to eat and what to avoid for optimum health. To find out more about the Nutrition Certification Program, plus to download your curriculum guide, head to foodmatters.com/study. You can pause this right now. It will only take you 30 seconds. That's foodmatters.com/study, or you can head to the show notes for more information. Have a beautiful day.
Hey everyone, it's James here, and today we're going to be talking about a really important topic. We're going to be talking about stress, we're going to be talking about adrenal fatigue, we're going to be talking about the thyroid potentially, and so if you're suffering from symptoms like feeling stressed out or fatigued or burnt out or even overwhelmed, I think is very common these days, or you feel like you might have thyroid issues or Hashimotos. My guest today is an expert in this space. Her name is Dr. Izabella Wentz. She's a passionate, innovative, and solution-focused clinical pharmacist, and then she went and trained in functional medicine. And she was also the author of a really successful docuseries that I remember when it came out a few years ago called The Thyroid Secret. And she's published a couple of books, including one on reversing Hashimotos naturally, and her latest book is on adrenal transformation. Hey, Izabella, how you doing?
I'm doing great, James. How about yourself?
I'm great, really good. So always interested in this first question. How did you get into, I guess, functional medicine after being a pharmacist? And then from functional medicine, how did you sort of progress into thyroid and adrenals, etc.?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I was never interested in thyroid during pharmacy school. I was like, oh, this condition is super boring. There's only like one drug to treat it, right? I always was interested in helping people with their health and helping people heal. When I was 18, the thought process for me was that medications were the best way to heal. And I wanted to find a cure one day for people to take back their health. During pharmacy school, I loved everything that I learned about, and I was very passionate about optimal medication use and took advanced trainings and became medication therapy certified. But I had a bit of a heartbreak when already working as a pharmacist, I was struggling with tons of symptoms that conventional medicine just couldn't really help me with, right? So I was in my early 20s and I started having irritable bowel syndrome, panic attacks, carpal tunnel, acid reflux, chronic allergies. I was exhausted all day. I was losing my hair. I was sleeping for 12 hours a night, but still waking up tired. And I kept going from doctor to doctor saying like, hey, I'm tired. Like, what's going on? This is not normal. They're like, well, the answers I got were, you're getting older. Everybody's tired. You know, mind you, I was 25. And then somebody offered to give me like Provigil or Adderall or stimulants or antidepressants. And I was just like, but what is going on? Like, why is my body breaking itself down? And finally, I was going through different doctors, and I was able to find somebody that was able to do a little bit more comprehensive testing. And I was tested positive for Hashimoto's, and I already had some degree of hypothyroidism. My thyroid was already underperforming. And I was like, yes, I get medications. I get a thyroid medication. All of my problems are going to go away. Right. And so I start on the thyroid medication and things get a little bit better. Sure, I don't sleep for 12 hours anymore. Now it's like 11 hours. I'm not wearing two jackets in Southern California. Now I only have to wear one. I got a little bit less cold. Cold intolerance is a big symptom. But part of me was like, okay, these medications helped a little bit, but I still have carpal tunnel. I still have irritable bowel syndrome. I still have these panic attacks. And I'm in my 20s. Like, I thought I was living a healthy lifestyle. Like, what are like the lifestyle things that contribute to my condition? Can I do anything to feel better? Can I do anything to reverse this? Like, don't get me wrong, I love medications, but is there anything else out there? And so I became like like a Hashimoto's expert, functional medicine expert slash guinea pig, from my own health experience, my own health journey, just trying to get myself to feel better because there weren't a lot of answers to all the doctors that I was going to and, top cities, top rated doctors. And they were just like, you take this little pill and your hair's falling out. Maybe that's not related. Or maybe you need to go see a psychiatrist if you're having anxiety. And yet through my functional medicine studies and through just being my own guinea pig and working with lots of people, all of the symptoms I had were intimately connected. And they were part of the whole picture of the autoimmune process, the inflammatory process, the stress response in the body. So that in a nutshell was basically because I needed to figure it out for myself. And then I became so passionate that I just was like, I need to share this with other people.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, you made an interesting connection there, and I guess it probably took you a big part of your journey to build that bridge and to find this connection between Hashimoto's or a thyroid condition being an autoimmune condition, which is driven by sort of lifestyle factors. So could you explain a little bit more what it means? What does Hashimoto's mean and how does it happen? And is it directly linked to it's an autoimmune condition, I understand. And what do you understand from your functional medicine training as some of the sort of leading causes or what happens upstream to cause this issue?
So absolutely. And Hashimoto's sounds like such an exotic and rare condition, right? It sounds like a Japanese sword fighter or something out of this world, but it's actually a very common condition with as many as 1 in 5 women may be affected at some point in their lives, men as well. But typically people are told that they have an underactive thyroid or that they have hypothyroidism or they're prescribed a medication like Synthroid or levothyroxine. They're told they have a sluggish thyroid, and they're not told why. And 97% of the time, it is because they have Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune attack on the thyroid gland that eventually leads to the breakdown of thyroid tissue. And I've become really well versed in some of the root causes of the condition. I've published my first book on it in 2013, and then since that time, I've worked with so many clients that they've taught me about all these different potential triggers and root causes that I had no idea about 10 years ago, such as breast implant illness or mold toxicity, right? But to categorize some of the patterns or some of the things of types of triggers, right? So I would say chronic infections are a possibility. A common one I see is H. pylori, Black cystis hominis, and then a lot of people talk about Epstein-Barr virus, but it's like one that gets the most attention, but isn't necessarily always the most problematic. Then we have inability to handle toxins. So there's some toxic overwhelm in the body, and this could be something like mold illness. This could be something like even breast implant illness. It could be another type of toxin as well. Another category of things I see are going to be nutrient deficiencies. And there's a handful of nutrient deficiencies that are very much common in Hashimoto's, one of them being selenium. When that's deficient, the body doesn't have a good balance of, it stops balancing out the inflammation that happens from naturally produced thyroid hormones. And then The other patterns are going to be food sensitivities, common ones being gluten, dairy, and soy. And then gut health issues is another kind of bucket of patterns. And kind of the last one, and the one that I've been really focusing on now, is going to be focused on basically a stress response. So, for whatever reason, people with this condition tend to have an impaired stress response. And this can be something like adrenal dysfunction, HPA axis dysfunction. And it's a really, really key component of getting rid of symptoms and getting onto a healing.
Yeah. Before we get to the stress component, which I think is becoming a bigger and bigger part of medicine, especially functional medicine, as we understand more about the stress response in the body, cortisol, melatonin, etc. But you mentioned something really interesting about breast implants, and I think this has been overlooked for many years. And I've known a number of women who have suffered from breast implant illness, and it's becoming increasingly popular. I mean, in the US, I heard a statistic the other week that there is 300,000 breast implant or augmentation surgeries done in the US each year. So over a 10-year period, that's 3 million, no, 30 million women, So really, no, 3 million women, sorry. So really, it's a fascinating thing. And it's very common. I see this it creates like this mystery illness list of symptoms that women suffer from. What have you learned about breast implant illness? Because I wanted to speak about it for some time and nobody's brought it up. So I'm glad that you did.
Wow, and I'm certainly not the expert in it. What I've learned, everything I've learned is from my clients that have had it. When I typically work with a person, I ask them what was going on in your life before you got sick. And a lot of the women, there was just interestingly, a lot of women said, I got my breast implants, right? And so this is something that typically women get in their 20s or maybe earlier on in life. And then eventually, as time goes on, um, some some women they end up forming almost there could be contamination, there could be leakage, there could be I know I've seen somewhere out there, not in my clients, when they've had explants, that there was maybe even like mold inside of the implants, and there was even like scar tissue forming around the implants to protect the women. But typically what I see is just like with anything else, their detox systems become overwhelmed. And so, whenever you think of a foreign body within you, that is going to lead to a lot of inflammation within you if your liver is going to be impaired, right? So, typically, what I see is people will have an imperative, like their toxin, their their detox pathways are just super super congested from trying to detox from whatever the breast implants are producing in their body. And so some supportive things, and definitely explant is what's usually recommended. Some really supportive things for most women in that situation is going to be going through a comprehensive detox protocol and a liver support protocol. So that might involve some herbs and nutrients to support the liver's ability to handle toxins, perhaps doing some sauna sessions. And that's like kind of the big piece. To generally, women will say like, oh my gosh, my inflammation, I'm feeling so much better as soon as they get the implants out. But then to really clear out the toxins, they also benefit from doing a comprehensive detox protocol.
Great. Excellent suggestions there. And it seems that detoxification almost helps everybody all the time in most instances. I guess I have a question about autoimmune conditions, and I've been taught by a few different people a certain understanding of how autoimmune conditions work. So my understanding is that it generally begins in the gut, and then there are sort of larger or macro particles that will leak through the gut wall into the bloodstream. And then the body doesn't recognize those macro particles, or they shouldn't be there. And so it sort of starts attacking itself. And often for women, that can result in a thyroid condition, like you're saying, like Hashimoto's. Um, is this the general pathway that causes autoimmune conditions through the gut? And what else do we know about it to have more awareness about that pathway that you could share with the audience so that they could sort of interrupt that a little bit if they were suffering?
So definitely there's a three-legged stool of autoimmunity that talks about you have the right genetic predisposition, and then you have some sort of a trigger, and then that intestinal permeability. And if you can address the cause of the intestinal permeability, then you can get the condition into remission. You can't always, um, you can't really change your genes, and you can't always figure out the exact trigger, but you can always figure out that intestinal permeability piece. For people that I typically work with, and they'll say, I have a family history of thyroid issues, right? And then I just got a case of Epstein-Barr virus and I never really recovered. For a lot of those people, I focus on testing their gut health. Epstein-Barr virus can be an important trigger for Hashimoto's if you have the right genes for various types of conditions. But most people have had it, right? There's probably not a person, um, very few people that haven't had it when they're, in their adult life. And so the kind of piece of that is oftentimes I see a parasitic pathogen. You can't see it with the naked eye. It's a protozoa. It's called Blastocystis hominis, and it sort of works in synergy with Epstein-Barr virus to create a hostile environment in the body and create that perfect storm for Hashimoto's. So it's been tied to irritable bowel syndrome, it's been tied to chronic hives, and it's been tied to Hashimoto's. I started seeing it in clients, a decade ago, and then the last few years, some research publications have been studied about if you address blastocystis hominis, you can get Hashimoto's into remission. And so, so the amazing thing is that this is very straightforward to address. So there is a probiotic called, and it's a yeast-based probiotic called Saccharomyces boulardii. I like to use this for most of my clients unless they have immune suppression or Crohn's disease or other kind of sensitivities that would, prevent them from using it. But this beneficial yeast, it helps to raise the body's secretory IgA levels, which is a protective immunoglobulin made by the gut to overcome various infections naturally, to help reduce food sensitivities, to get rid of some of the protozoan parasites, to help fight infections like H. pylori, help clear out candida, help clear out any kind of a lot of the bad stuff that might be in the gut. The Saccharomyces boulardii is one of these beautiful broad spectrum supplements that just kind of helps to clean it up a bit. And in some cases, it can completely clear the infection. Other cases, you might need more support. But this is one of the things that I talk about often, and taking it even on a preventative basis when you go to um, foreign countries, then you might be exposed to some of the foods there and you might get food poisoning or, Montezuma's revenge, whatever the name is in that country. Taking that on a preventive basis, especially where we're under stress. Stress can deplete our secretory IgA levels. That just gives you a little bit more resilience to getting new gut pathogens and a little bit more resilience to help your body fight whatever's currently in there and overcome it in a very gentle way too. So that's kind of one of the things that I love to recommend for a lot of people.
That's great. And if somebody is not presenting any symptoms, should they be taking it? Is this something you recommend people are taking on a frequent basis, or just take a course of it once a year? How do you normally recommend it? I know that this is general advice, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely depends on the person. And if you currently have digestive symptoms, it works very well for diarrhea. So that's that. If you're going to be traveling, going somewhere, if you know you're under a lot of stress, it might be very helpful to utilize that. It does support, immune function in the gut, may help to support just kind of being sick from being run down. And definitely half of the people on average are that have gut pathogens and gut issues may be asymptomatic, or maybe they think they're asymptomatic. I know I work with a lot of people that are like, I don't have any gut issues. And then we do some tests and sure enough, some things come out, and then we utilize some protocols. They're like, wait, it's not supposed to hurt when I poop, right? Or like, holy cow, where do these abs come from? And so, I personally had stomach aches for most of my life until I got off of gluten and dairy. And I was like, holy cow, this is what a normal stomach feels like. I didn't even know. So it is something to consider, definitely, if you're feeling like you have stomach issues, if you have a condition, an autoimmune condition to consider doing, and definitely if you're under a lot of stress, are going to be definitely if you're under a lot of stress or if you're going to be traveling.
Okay, great suggestions there. Thank you so much. So you mentioned gluten and wheat. I mean, these seem to be very common triggers for gut dysbiosis. Many of the guests and experts I've interviewed in the documentaries we've done have spoken about this. Are there any other foods? Do you have like a top 5 foods or a top 10 foods to avoid when it comes to like gut dysbiosis? And I know that it's individual for everybody. Not everybody's going to react to the same foods, but what would be on your top foods to avoid list if people were presented with some thyroid or autoimmune condition?
Gluten, dairy, soy are some of the big ones. For some people, grains are also problematic. And then eggs tend to be an issue for some people as well. I I know I personally love eggs, and I've been able to figure out a protocol for most people to be able to get eggs back into their diet. But for short term, that is something that people may need to avoid.
Got it. Good list. I tend to agree. Let's talk about stress and the adrenals now. You know, in your latest work, you're talking about this sort of adrenal protocol and adrenal fatigue. And I've heard some different things about the adrenals. You know, and I've even heard that like adrenal burnout is not real, it's not a thing, and people sometimes say that, and then they say adrenal fatigue. What's the real truth here?
So, it's kind of interesting because people will say like adrenal fatigue doesn't exist, and then they'll call it HPA axis dysfunction, right? Where I think the old school naturopaths and people that initially coined the term, I think there was a lovely gentleman named James Wilson. The school of thought back in the day was that your adrenals actually get tired and they can't produce enough hormones. Like that was the story, right? But I think we found that's not actually the case. What's happening is that there's a misfiring, miscommunication between our brain and our actual adrenal glands. And so the adrenals are perfectly capable of producing adequate amounts of stress hormones. Like we need just the right we need just the right amounts at the right times of day to feel optimal. Not too much, because then we could feel awful. And if we don't have enough, we can feel awful as well. But what's happening when we're under a lot of chronic stress is essentially that breakdown of that communication pathway where the adrenals don't release the right amounts of cortisol throughout the day, even though they're capable of doing it. I kind of think of it like kind of like an insulin resistance, like your body's saying like do this, but this part of the body is not listening to this part of the body, and that is really the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that is dysfunctioning. And that's like the official term. People are like, leaky gut doesn't exist, but intestinal permeability does. And I kind of think of it as like, okay, so it's everybody calls it adrenal fatigue and it doesn't exist. But when you call it HPA axis dysfunction, you can see so many research articles that talk about it and how it does exist and what the manifestations are and how it develops. So I don't know. I personally am kind of like, oh, okay, like I'm just it's adrenal fatigue. I know it doesn't mean that you're tired, but it's a convenient way to describe what's going on with when we feel burned out, right?
So inside the adrenals, you mentioned that they're responsible for manufacturing cortisol. And from some of my discussions with, Dr. Alan Christensen and a few others, we need cortisol, right? But we just do not want long-term elevated levels of cortisol, basically. I know Gail, Krista Recchia, everyone speaks about this in terms of driving chronic inflammation. So if the adrenals are responsible for cortisol, what's happening? Is it producing not enough, or is it producing too much all the time? Or is it producing at the wrong time of days? What's happening with this sort of malfunction?
Well, all of the different, there's a few different dysfunctional patterns that can happen when we have healthy adrenal cortisol production. We start off with high cortisols in the morning, and that kind of gets us out of bed. We get out of bed bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then the cortisol levels kind of gradually drop throughout the day, so we can kind of go on about our day to get things we need to do get done. and we're ready to really wind down at night, right? And in the evening time, we only have a little bit of cortisol to allow for proper melatonin production. And so when we have chronic, like, let's say we're in an acute stress situation, what's going to happen is that our body's going to release a whole bunch of cortisol above that curve to help us survive. So let's say, like childbirth, like you need lots of cortisol there to be in labor for 24 hours straight or 36 hours straight. You don't want to be like, falling asleep in the middle of it. So that would be a situation where the body would respond that way, or you're being chased by a tiger. Not a good time to take a nap, right? So your body knows that. Your body's like, let's give you some cortisol so you could run as fast as you can. Now, and these are acute stressors, and hopefully the body is able to, shake it off, clear out the cortisol, and things get back to that beautiful normal cortisol curve within a few days. This doesn't happen in the modern world for a variety of reasons. For Usually because we're under chronic stress. And so what can happen is people are stuck in too much cortisol all day. They can be stuck in a what I like to, and I like to demonstrate with my hands, right? But they can be stuck in a cortisol roller coaster where they might have high cortisol, then it drops down really low and you feel anxious and you have a panic attack, goes up really high, and then you sleep at night. They might have a flip cortisol curve where in the morning they can barely get out of bed, they're trudging along, and then in the evenings their cortisol is high and they're like wired but tired. And then the kind of last phase of it that I've seen a lot in people with like chronic fatigue and like Hashimotos where they can't get out of bed is they have a flatlined cortisol curve where they're just low cortisol all day. So they barely get out of bed, they're tired in the morning, they're just super super brain fogged throughout the day, and they could sleep for 12 hours and the next still wake up tired. So a few different of those patterns can occur, right? And at various stages, a person might go through all of those patterns in their life. I would say the flat line is the most kind of advanced when you've had a lot of chronic stress or it's progressed very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for the explanation. That makes sense. And when it comes to these types of, this type of adrenal sort of malfunction, I would say, what have you discovered about that in terms of being able to interrupt that and help it get back to normal function? I know that your book, it has a 4-week plan to get rid of these symptoms, but what are some of the key sort of practices that people could partake in to help with this?
So what I typically think about why this has happened is because of chronic stress. And so I like to think about what are the signals in our life that our body is sensing that we're under so much stress, right? And so sleep deprivation is a really big one, for example. So sleep deprivation is the fastest way to get into HPA axis dysfunction. It's also getting enough sleep, getting quality sleep is also one of the best ways to get out of it. And so yeah, so I have a lot of safety signals that I focus on to help a person recover from the chronic stress. Should we talk about them?
Please, yeah, that'd be really great. I mean, sleep and stress is such a big topic right now. I feel like sleep is getting a lot of attention, which is great, as it should. So yeah, let's talk about sleep and stress. That's really big.
Okay, great. So one of the key things I focus on is establishing a healthy circadian rhythm. So for many people that struggle getting out of bed in the morning, trying to reestablish them having more energy in the morning, and for the people that feel wired and tired at night, trying to get them to feel uh, you know, like they're ready to rest and sleep in the evening time and ready to wind down. And so I kind of go through daily routines and daily rhythms with people. One of the things I recommend in the morning is making sure that you have bright light exposure. So if you live in a warm and sunny place, step outside of your door, go on your balcony. It does have to be outside because the light indoors isn't as bright. And just try to soak up the sunshine for 5 to 10 minutes. You might be waking up at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. because you're exhausted and fatigued, but every day that you do that, you'll be able to wake up a little bit earlier and with a little bit more energy. If you live in a cold climate, you could use various types of light therapies, like the seasonal effective lights are one example that people might use for that. And then, as one of the things I recommend is making sure that you get um, a good source of protein, fat, vitamin C, which gets burned out in the stress response, and then a little bit of glucose. So I typically recommend something and electrolytes. Forgot to mention electrolytes. I can't believe I forgot electrolytes. So important. So this is an adrenal kickstart drink, and I recommend that for people within 30 minutes or so of waking up. And you take some orange juice, coconut milk. You can put some electrolytes in there to support healthy sodium levels and potassium levels to help you raise up a little bit of your cortisol in the morning, a little bit of protein powder, and then you make that into a smoothie. It tastes like an orange creamsicle. It's really, really good. And I recommend for people to sip that first thing in the morning to help themselves wake up a little bit. And then as the day goes on, making sure you're getting the right kind of signals in the body, plenty of bright lights throughout the day. As we tend to wind down in the evening, once the sun sets, really focusing on not having external sources of light in your eyes because these can suppress your melatonin production. So I know we have beautiful smoke detectors and fire alarms in our bedrooms that save our lives, but if they have little bright lights on them, that could be actually interfering with our sleep. So putting little stickers over that, maybe using some blue blocker glasses, as well as having a nice bedtime routine. I love Epsom salt baths, so warm the body using the magnesium from Epsom salts that helps to promote relaxation and sleep, and then having a little bit of cold exposure before we go to bed, and also keeping your bedroom a little bit cooler and dark like a cave, right? That's going to help us fall asleep faster and get into a deeper sleep so our body can regenerate and have more energy. So these are kind of some of the fundamentals of healing, and they're very, very foundational things that most people can do and have access to.
No, that's great. I mean, I think the recommendations, like you say, are very foundational. They are good for a lot of people. Um, One question I have, I mean, I understand about cooling the room down in the evening, and that can help you fall asleep faster. But then doing an bath in the evening or cooling, having a sort of a cold exposure in the evening, I tend to think that might actually enliven me a little bit more because when I come out of an ice bath, I generally feel quite awake. Um, does that actually help you go to sleep, or is that helping you wake up? When should people do this?
So the ice bath isn't part of my protocol. I do utilize heat therapy, but generally people with really depleted adrenals, like you said, that might not be the best fit for them, especially if they're trying to go to bed. I love using ice baths as more of an advanced strategy. Once I typically want to send a lot of safety signals first before we start building resilience and before we start adding those kind of, the stressors that help us grow. So first we want to get a person ready. And a lot of the things that I recommend are very soothing, and they're very like, think of putting yourself in a warm cocoon and being really kind to yourself and adding a lot of really pleasurable activities. And we focus on that stuff first before we add some of the stuff that helps us grow and helps us become more resilient, right? So with the ice baths, they can be incredibly helpful, but it's generally something that's a little bit more advanced. You wouldn't want to do that with for somebody that is really fatigued and really burned out, right?
Mm, no, that makes sense. You know, you mentioned something interesting there. When we were first talking about sort of autoimmune conditions, you were talking about how it can be triggered by leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And then we're talking about stress. With your patients that you see presenting with adrenal dysfunction or a thyroid condition, do you see any correlation with patients that are suffering like emotional stress or trauma or other sort of non-food sort of related challenges to the gut? Is this common in the patients that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where you can have the perfect diet and do everything really, really well, but if you're carrying around trauma, within your body or current psychological, emotional stress, that's going to be, that tack that is cutting inside of your body that's causing the inflammation, right? And so there's people that have really obvious sources of stress in their bodies, like maybe they have a job that they dislike. And I've had a few people, they've provided me feedback on my book. They're like, I didn't have to do any of what you said. I just quit my job and then my Hashimoto's went away, right? And I'm like, good for you, right? That was the obvious stressor for you. For most people, it's actually a few different things, right? And so you might have an early history of trauma that then sets up your stress response patterns a certain way, and that leaves you in a constantly stressed out state so that your gut is always susceptible to infections. And so part of a healing program for that person might be really comprehensive, where they need to work through all of the physical manifestations that they have. And then they also need to work on healing their past trauma. I always say, like, doing positive affirmations and all of that is like putting band-aids on a leaky boat if you haven't done the trauma work. So I talk about that in the advanced section of the book. It's making sure we do that work. If we have part of building resilience is making sure you get rid of whatever is bringing you down. And past history of trauma and any kind of traumatic experiences can be weighing us down, right?
Sure. Do you mention any protocols, or do you find anything that's working efficiently for people that are trying to work through trauma or stuck emotions in the body?
I personally really like EMDR, so eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it kind of sounds wacky, but there's a psychologist named Francine Shapiro who was walking through some woods, and as she was moving her head or her eyes from left to right, and was thinking about some experiences she had had. She realized that they weren't causing her as much distress as they had previously. So it is usually a therapist guided um, therapy, right? Where you focus on a specific traumatic event that you went through. And it's just really, really amazing, because there's some therapies that take you on like 7 years of exploring why, your mom did XYZ and why your brother was a jerk. And it's like you don't really get anywhere with it. With EMDR, you can reprocess like super traumatic events within like 1 to 3 sessions. Um, Sessions being like 1 hour long, right? And so the therapist basically will guide you to tap into your stored emotions and your stored memories. And then you're able to reprocess them. So things that would be really triggering in the past and really hurtful, and especially things that happened when you were a child, you're able to see them from a new light. You're able to see what was going on, and what the bigger picture meant. So maybe your mom yelled at you when you were little, and that led you to believe that you were a bad person. And then the therapist takes you through this process where you're able to be there for your little self, your little James. You give little James a hug, right? And then you realize, oh my gosh, little James wasn't a bad person. It was that, that mom was just overwhelmed in that moment. And I totally get what was going on in her life as an adult now. And it's just a really beautiful healing therapy that can rewire our brain and our stress response. So I love that, but you have to find like a talented therapist to do that. And I love neurofeedback too. So that is something you can do on your own or with a therapist, where you go through and you just help to get rid of and help to clear out some of those negative thought patterns.
Yeah, I think that it's become such a big issue, Isabella, because we have so much stress in the modern world. We're exposed to so much information, and then we are also descendants of, our ancestors 2 or 3 generations back who lived through some pretty traumatic times, especially when there was a couple of, two large world wars in the last 100 or so years. And working through that trauma as a modern human is interesting, especially given how technologically advanced our age is. And I find that there's more people, and there's a few other podcasts I've done with some doctors that are exploring things like ketamine assisted therapy or or psilocybin assisted therapy or MDMA assisted therapy. And I know MAPS is getting more and more attention in the US. Have you, in your sort of approach, explored any of these modalities, or do you think there's any merit in any of these modalities for helping people with trauma? And I know as well, just to say something, that not everything's going to work for everybody all the time. So it's about finding what works for you. But what are your thoughts on these therapies?
So I know a few people in Boulder that work with those therapies, and I personally haven't worked with them. I have had a woman that was a client of mine that worked with somebody in that, and I will just say that she was completely transformed by the therapy. She did MDMA assisted therapy, and I just was amazed at the transformation. And I think she was actually considered a failure in the trial, but she was extremely, extremely grateful for it. And she thought it changed her life and made her, she had a long history of trauma in it, and she thought it made her life so much better. And she was no longer reactive. So I feel like it can be a powerful tool for helping people heal. I don't have any experience with ketamine assisted therapy or anything like that. But the MDMA therapy, I have had some people go through that and they found it to be really beneficial.
Amazing. I guess, there was a really interesting quote by a holistic dentist in the first documentary I made called Food Matters, and it came out in 2008. And this quote actually didn't make it into the film; it just made it into the trailer. But he said this. This funny line, and trigger warning too, probably for people listening. He said, "The best thing that terrorists can do is to try to take over America is to not do anything. Just let us eat our fast food, keep going on about our daily lives, and we're going to kill ourselves." And it was a really shocking statement, but it's sort of true in a way. And if you take trauma, and then trauma and unresolved trauma and stress can lead to binge eating and consumption of these toxic fast foods that we've sort of, America and the developed West has become famous for, right? And so we're stressed out, and then we're eating these toxic foods, and then we become these, let's say, diminished versions of ourselves, right? And I think there's a much bigger mission and goal at play here, is that if we're able to shake off the trauma and the stress and eat more in alignment with our sort of biological design, we'll be able to unlock an incredible amount of potential, energy, talent, innovation, love, compassion, empathy, etc., and really shift the whole direction of the world in quite a short period of time. What are your thoughts on this? Is there? I just think there's a huge unlock and potential to make a massive impact if we can really take our health into our own hands.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I often feel like I think there's a quote that goes, if you don't heal what cut you, you will bleed on those that didn't cut you, right? And so there's there's this amazing thing that happens when people, for example, support their adrenals. They don't say that I'm a nicer person and I feel better. They will often say, everybody around me is less of a jerk, right? So they'll find they have more compassion for other people. They have a lot more empathy for themselves, and that translates to more empathy for other people when they heal themselves. And though I think the world can be a much more peaceful place. And I have women that go through my programs and they'll be like 70 years old and they're like, I always wanted to write a book, but I was brain fogged for so long. And they're first time authors at age 70 sharing the wisdoms that they gained along the way. Or people starting businesses. I feel like when a person is unhealthy, a lot of times all they could focus on is that, right? So they just want to feel better. They just don't want to be in pain. They just don't want to be brain fogged. They don't want to be depressed. They want to have energy. And when you allow them to be the vital, empowered, strong, energetic person that they're meant to be, just so much creation happens in the world, and so much, so much peace and so much beauty can happen, right?
Absolutely. I love that. What a really positive spin. And I'm really excited that you're doing this work. And of course, I've followed along from since the Thyroid Secret came out, and really excited about your new book. So how can people find out about it? So they can go to Amazon, and it's called Adrenal Transformation Protocol. Is that correct?
Yep, Adrenal Transformation Protocol, and it's a 4-week plan from to going from survival to thriving to really help people feel like the person that they're meant to be.
Nice. And how can people follow you? Did they just Google your name, Dr. Izabella Wentz? So they'll probably look up in GPT, who is this lady?
They can go to thyroidpharmacist.com. That's my website. I'm also on Instagram under Izabella Wentz PharmD. I have a guide, thyroidpharmacist.com/ABC, that has the ABCs of supporting your adrenals. So things like adrenal adaptogens, some of the B vitamins, vitamin C, and magnesium. These are things that can be very helpful in replenishing your body when it's been under stress for a long time. And that'll help you sleep better, feel better, be more calm, be a bit more resilient when you just start doing some of these fundamental foundational things. It can make a really, really big difference very quickly and help you feel like calm, powerful, and strong.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Well, I'm really grateful for your dedication to this topic, and really going deep on it, and having had personal experience and then a clinical background. I think it's a great match, and I know that our audience is going to love this interview, and hopefully this is not the last we hear from you. You can be involved more in what we do, and that'd be really great. So thank you so much for your time, Izabella, and have a beautiful day. And I hope that people listening can check out your work and your latest book.
Thank you so much, James. It's been a pleasure.
For everything that we've mentioned in today's episode, you can check out the show notes. There will be links and information there for you. And before I go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to invest in yourself and be here for this podcast. If there's anybody that you can think of who could benefit from this information, please make sure to share it with them. We believe in the power of life-changing information, and it's especially powerful when it's shared from a trusted source. And finally, if you could leave us a comment or make sure to subscribe to the podcast, we would greatly appreciate that. It helps us continue to bring you this life-changing information, and make sure that you get all future podcast updates sent to you. Have a beautiful day, and thank you once again.